Hi there, Scott Nicholson here from Syracuse University. Welcome to the Games and Libraries course. This is session number 3. Now today I wanted to talk about analog games. So I've been talking about different types of games. I talked about the difference between analog games and digital games. And so today I'm going to focus on analog games. Now, analog games are those that are centered around some kind of a board or card. They have a physical manifestation. It's a person-to-person experience where you're interacting with each other face to face. Now, analog games also represent the oldest types of games in libraries. In fact, we've traced gaming in the US in libraries back into the 1850s, where in San Francisco there was a library that had a chess club that met there in a chess room, just for the chess club. And that chess club is the oldest chess club in existence today, and it still meets at that library. Libraries have actually been supporting gaming for a long time. They've been supporting chess and Scrabble and bridge and things like that. Now, when I look at games, there's several different classes that I look at. So we'll start with board and card games. The first category are traditional board and card games. And these are things like chess and checkers and mahjong and bridge and hearts. And all of these games, the thing they have in common is that the rules are in the public domain. There's no charge to get a hold of the rules, and you just need to get your own set of components, your own board or your own cards, in order to play them. And I bet if you think, you've probably seen chessboards in libraries for a very long time. So this is something that's lived in libraries for some time. The second class of board games are mass market games. These are games that you can buy in Walmart or Target or mass market stores. One of the most commonly known games in that line is Monopoly. Time for my Monopoly rant. Monopoly is not a particularly engaging game, and it takes a long time to play, and players get eliminated as the game goes on. In addition, most of the decisions in the game are primarily based upon lucky rolls of the dice. Monopoly is not a very good choice for a library gaming event. Why? Well, because a library gaming event will usually only run for a couple of hours. And if you have Monopoly, people are going to come in and they'll say, oh, look at all this other stuff. Do I really want to sit and play Monopoly for somewhere between an hour and 8 hours, depending upon which free parking rules? Oh, by the way, free parking, don't play with that free parking rule. All that does is randomly add about an hour to the game and sort of randomly hands out money to each other. If you want to do that, just sort of randomly take money from the pot every once in a while. Anyway, that's mini rant over, back to the main rant. And so when people think about board games, they say, oh, you mean like Monopoly? I'm like, yeah, well, yeah, like Monopoly, but fun, because many people have bad memories of board games because of Monopoly. So the only time I would suggest you bring out Monopoly is if your goal is to have a Monopoly-based tournament. That's what you want to do. Get people here to play Monopoly, then it's okay. Otherwise, there are many better choices of games. Now, also some other mass market games. Scrabble's a very popular one, and that one tends to fit in very well with libraries. Scrabble is a quiet game, best played with two, and the nice thing about Scrabble is you can bring in Scrabble clubs who will host the game and help run things for you. Now, the third type of game we're going to talk about are what I'll call designer games. Now, designer games, or modern games, or Euro games is the term that you tend to hear. The reason why they're called Euro games is because a large flux of board games came over from Europe about 10, 15 years ago. One of the best known ones is the Settlers of Catan. And so they have more interesting decisions to make. They tend to be shorter games, and they tend to have turns where everyone's involved all the time. So Settlers of Catan, for example, in every turn of the game, during each player's turn, everyone can trade and barter resources with the player. There's no money involved. It's all about bartering of resources. So you're always engaged. Every turn, you might be able to get resources. The other thing some of these games have are very, very short turns. So a game called Carcassonne, which is a game about laying down tiles in order to make a map in a city, with very short turns. You draw a tile, you play a tile, it's the next player's turn. It goes very quickly. And so a lot of these modern games, but by the way, the reason why they're called designer games is because the designer's name is usually on the box. So Ticket to Ride is one of the best gateway games into this, and there's Alan Moon is the designer of this game. And so these Euro games, these modern games, these designer games provide many more interesting decisions than a number of the mass market games you see. Now, there's some good resources to learn about these things. The best website is boardgamegeek.com. However, I have a site out there, this is why I've learned to do these videos, is doing something called Board Games with Scott. Board Games with Scott, I take one of these sort of modern games and talk about them. And they run anywhere from 10 minutes to an hour based upon how complex the game is. I've got over 50 videos out there, and you can see them over at boardgameswithscott.com. And in each video, I teach you a single game. Now, there's one episode that you can consider to be optional reading for this lesson of the class, and that is this episode here. This episode is Gaming 101, and so what I do in this episode is I talk about a number of classes of these board games. So I go much more into depth into board games. There's one type of board game, though, I want to talk about. So if you start talking with people who are really into modern board games, they're going to talk about things that are called gateway games. The idea of gateway games is they're easy-to-learn games that can engage someone in the world of modern board games who will say, wow, I didn't know these existed. Some of the best-known gateway games are Ticket to Ride, Carcassonne, and Settlers of Catan. The problem with all three of these games is that they take too long to play for a library gaming program. If people come into a gaming program and you've got a Wii going over there and you've got DDR going over there, and then you have, well, we got Settlers of Catan, which is going to take you an hour and a half to play. While it's still engaging, it's too long for that setting. So I have come up with a new term, and that term is the concept of a bait game. And so the bait games, those are modern games which are much shorter, much easier to teach, and they work very well in this element where you're trying to lure people over. Because what I have seen is that when I set up both board games and video games, people come in, they play with the video games a little bit, and then they're drawn to the board games if they're appropriate games and they're laid out and someone's teaching them. And I'll explain more about that a lot later in this class. But these bait games, the idea is that it lures people over and gets them engaged with each other. And once they've played some bait games, if they want a longer experience, you could introduce Ticket to Ride, or you could just play more bait games. That'd be fine too. Now, here are a few bait games I'll briefly talk about. I think one of the best bait games is called Tsuro, T-S-U-R-O. This is currently out of print. It just went out of print, but it's being republished by another company. This game plays from 2 to 8 people, and it's about connecting paths on a board. What's clever and cool about the game is it plays from 2 to 8 people and doesn't take long to play at all. And so you can have a wide variety of player numbers. You can get right into it, and it's about staying alive. It's a very fast game. I really like this game a lot. A dexterity-based game is Sorry Sliders. So this is a mass market game, actually. What has gone on is Hasbro, Parker Brothers, the whole conglomerate that makes board games, they've realized, they've seen this whole element of designer board games and have started to look at ways of making their games a little bit more interesting. So Sorry Sliders is a good example of that. And Sorry Sliders is a game, it's where you have a track and you're sliding your pawns trying to get to the middle. It's a dexterity game. But it gets you some face-to-face interaction. And I have a video on this in my series Scott Stuff. You can see that right here. Another good one is Hey, That's My Fish. This game has also recently been reprinted. This is a game of penguins eating fish. It's a very attractive game. It's also a light strategy game. And what's nice about the game is it's easy to learn, but it's got a lot of clever things going on. A bait game that many of you may have already seen is called Blokus, or Blokus. The problem with this game, it's a good game, it's very attractive, is you really need 4 people to play it. You can play it with 2 as well, but with 3 it's not any good. But with 4 people, you can play this one. But there are other types of games too. There's collectible card games. Now, collectible card games, some of the best known ones are Magic the Gathering and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! The idea behind these games is it's like baseball cards. You buy a pack and you don't know what's in the pack. When you get the cards, you can actually play a game with them, and each player builds their own deck. And so in Magic the Gathering, there are 2 wizards that are firing spells at each other and throwing monsters at each other. And a Pokemon is just like the Pokemon series that you're collecting little critters, and the critters are fighting at each other. And so you go out and you buy these packs. It can be very expensive games too. But the advantage of collectible card games is the library could run a very cheap program, letting people know that this is the time to come to the library and swap cards with each other. There's also role-playing games. Now, role-playing games are games where you're telling a story as a group. One player is the game master, and then everyone else is a player. Dungeons & Dragons is one of the best known ones. And so here's the way that might work. Let's say I am the dungeon master, and you all are my hardy troop of adventurers. Now, let's go, hardy troop of adventurers, and your quest is to go and to get into that castle over there. So the castle has a drawbridge that is currently up and a moat. And there's obviously some motion in the moat, something swimming. What are you going to do? You're going to check out the moat? You're going to go around the castle? You're going to climb a tree for a better view? You're going to try to bluff your way in? You're going to try to fight your way in. That's what happens in a role-playing game. Now, in role-playing games, this is where there's a challenge. So you may say that you want to jump over the moat. So I have to decide, all right, your character, we look at your character sheet, which tells me what your character can do. And let's say your character does have the ability to jump. Now, usually associated with the ability is some sort of score that tells you how good. So you may have, for example, the skill of jumping at a 6 out of 10. Which means you're 60% of the time you can make a difficult jump. Okay, so I will tell you to roll some dice. Now the dice that are used in role-playing games, what they do is they come into play when there's a challenge. So I say, all right, you have a 60% chance of jumping over the moat. Do you want to jump? And you say, sure, and you roll the dice. And the dice are going to be, there's 10-sided dice that you can use that'll determine a percentage value from 0 to 100. Or 0, 1 to 100 actually. And so you roll the dice, and if you roll under a 60, then you succeed, and if you go over a 60, then you fail. So that's what the dice are used, and the dice are used to negotiate these challenges, and that's what a role-playing game is really all about. Now, if you want to get your library involved with either Dungeons & Dragons or Magic the Gathering, the company that makes both of those games, Wizards of the Coast, is actually very supportive of libraries, and they have something called the Wizards Play Network. There's some information here on the screen. If you go to this URL, then you can look at the Wizards Play Network, and what you do is you sign up your library as a place where people can play these games. In exchange, you're going to get free Magic and free Dungeons & Dragons stuff and support on how to run these games. And so it's something to think about. If you want to get some free stuff and help get people who are playing these games into your library, then this is the URL to visit. Now, another type of game are battle games. So battle games are war games, and there's two main types of those. There's ones that use little miniatures where the miniatures are fighting against each other, and there's ones that use cardboard chips. There's two classes of time where these games tend to take place. Either they're historical, meaning they're set in something in the past, like a battle, a civil war, something like that, or they are futuristic or fantasy, meaning it's like in the space, there's space robots fighting, or they're fantasies, so it's elves and dwarfs fighting. These games end up getting two or more teams having a big battle at each other. And what's kind of neat about the miniatures games is they're very impressive. People spend a lot of time painting up their miniatures, putting them out on large mats and with all sorts of terrain, and we'll play all day on these things. And it's very eye-catching. And in fact, if you want to have an eye-catching library gaming program, find a local historical or fantasy miniatures group and invite them to come and set up at the library, because their stuff is going to be really eye-attracting. It'll draw people over. And in the case of the historical games, there's actually a really strong learning element, because these are set in the time of the battle, and the troops are the troops that were there. There's a lot of history that's going on with the game. So that's about it for the major classes of tabletop games. You've got casino games as well, which are games like poker and blackjack, where people can come in. You wouldn't actually have them play for money in a library, but you could have a nice casino night where people play against each other. So that wraps up what I wanted to say about tabletop games. And again, what I want to try and encourage you is to get out of the mindset that gaming is video gaming. It's not. Gaming is way bigger, and gaming can be used to reach a wide variety of patrons and meet a wide variety of needs, especially when you look at everything, all of these different types of games. Now tomorrow, I'm going to talk about digital games and different types of video games like I've talked about here. But for now, head over to Board Games with Scott and go watch Board Games 101 to learn more about the wide variety of board games that are out there. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you later.